Welcome to week 2 of History 601, Introduction to Public History. I hope that you enjoyed the readings for week 1. We're going to start by talking a little bit about how many disciplines have their own alliterative rules. For example, back in the 1950s, one of the presidents of a major, nonprofit marketing association mainly for retail, came up with the 4 P's of retail marketing: product, price, place, and promotion. Now, these sort of things like the 4 P's of marketing can be useful mnemonic devices, memory devices, to help professionals concentrate on what's vitally important. And if you want to look up the 4 P's of marketing, there's a very good explanation here on this web link. Now, not wanting to feel left out, in this world of alliterative mnemonic devices, I've come up with the 4 A's of public history. Well, sort of anyhow, with one exception. I'll give you the first 3 A's of public history, and as a class, as a graduate seminar class online, we'll come up with a 4th one. Rule number 1 we already introduced last week, and it's just like, remember I said, the major rules of real estate: location, location, location. Well, rule number 1, and it only counts for one rule, by the way, is audience, audience, audience. Certainly, you've already begun to feel that in our lectures. All of our classes here and the Masters in Public History program at Northern Kentucky University are going to underscore that, especially your exhibits and design classes, documentary film classes, research classes, etc. And so let's look at this a little bit in a little bit more detail, and you'll be fleshing this out for, the next classes that you take and all of the classes that you take here in the public history program. One of the first things that we have to consider with audience is age level. Now, assuming that many of you will be working at one time or another in a museum or an historical house, it's important, and it's even important, by the way, in libraries, so in archives as well. A lot of emphasis is being put these days on the Common Core curriculum, which is inviting more and more participation in the humanities, in the social studies. For a while, for a good 5 to 10 years, the humanities and social studies were kind of on the decline in K through 12. I think you all know what I mean by K through 12, kindergarten through 12 education. And now they're making this vast resurgence, especially in the area of analytical thinking, critical thinking, which is, of course, something that the social studies and the humanities, the fine arts, have to offer. And that's something you're going to see quite often in museums. And it's interesting because, we live in this world of computer technology. And in this world of computer technology, we have literally at our fingers access in any number of seconds or minutes all of the information, not all of it trustworthy, by the way, on the internet. So if somebody wants to learn about the French Revolution, the American Revolution, they can go onto the internet and do that, where in years past they would have to seek out a museum or seek out particularly a library and go to that library and, adhere to their hours of operation, etc. So anyhow, audience is very important, and the K through 12 audience is going to be very, very important to us, as will their parents, who will bring K through 12 students, and their teachers, and of course their grandparents, because the role that grandparents play, obviously, in bringing their grandchildren to educational and cultural institutions is becoming increasingly important. So when we put together our exhibits, our tours, our materials, we need to make certain that they're age appropriate. Obviously, your museum might have certain tours for school groups, right? And you need to make certain that those materials, and we'll talk about this more and more as the class proceeds are tied into the curriculum, and especially the core curriculum of K through 12. And obviously the same things that appeal to a young person are not going to necessarily appeal to a teenager, to a young adult, or to an older adult. And in fact, we need to also be aware of, and we'll talk a little bit more about learning styles in another lecture and for another week. Audience, determining where they are at. And I like this signpost from Google.com images, which shows the intersection of past and present and future. And kind of interesting because the past is pointing this way, the future is pointing this way, and of course the present is out here. As you enter into any organization, nonprofit or for-profit, museum, historical society, archive, or whatever, obviously you may have to rely upon what has been done in the past at that institution. Have they performed old surveys and evaluations? Have they had annual reports? Getting to know what they've done in the past and what has worked, what they've attempted, and what has not worked may be useful to get to know the culture of that institution. And we'll talk a lot about in this class about, an institutional kind of culture, because all institutions have their own institutional culture. The present is, of course, the live audience, and how you deal with them, especially if you're a docent, or you're training a docent, or you're the director, or you're working on an exhibit, or whatever, is interesting, because you often need, with a live audience, with people right there at your museum, your archives, your historical society, to be able to ask questions, not prying into their personal life, obviously, but to be able to ask questions that help clarify for you and them what they might be looking for. This is especially important if they're using a library or an archives. Sometimes they have no idea really how to articulate those questions to you. And with audience, it's very important for us to put ourselves in the role of the audience. Now, this is going to become increasingly difficult the more and more professionalized we become, because, sometimes the more and more we do something, the more automatic it becomes to us. Those synapses in our brain are, over and over again, and we just make assumptions about our audience, that they already know, say, about the Civil War, or that they already know the major topics of controversy or debate with the Civil War, or they know that somehow we have pamphlets and ephemera in our collection, or they know how to use the microfilm machines, or they even know what microfilm is, or they know what resources are generally available to them. Do they know what city directories are, etc.? These are all kinds of things we'll be exploring during this course and during many of the other courses that you'll be taking here in the public history program. So again, always trying to go back to the audience, to relate to that audience in front of you and saying, do they know this or that, without at any point in time making it seem like they are somehow below you, they don't know as much as you, they're somehow ignorant. You never, never, ever want to cross the line of being just, unwilling to somehow put yourself in their position and to relate to them at that particular moment. Always having respect for where they're at. So asking the proper questions and listening and interacting is very important. So you don't just keep asking questions of them. I mean, you don't want to make this seem like, they're under a light, under, surveillance by the CIA or something. You want to ask a few questions, but you want to spend a lot of time listening. And that's where interaction comes by. Interact, to communicate, means to ask questions, to talk, but also to listen. Future planning. You also have to consider the audience and what their future needs are going to be, or based upon what you found out about the past or the present of the institution that you're at, how you might correct inadequacies in what is being done. Well, that's rule number one, and we'll talk much more about that, and Tilden will help in his book to explain that even more to us. Public history rule number 2 is attention to detail. Now, it's interesting, when I kind of put together over the years these 3 A's of public history, which again, you're going to come up with a 4th A. It's just, as I go to museums, I now look at them with a different eye, or an historical society, archives, etc. So if I say museums, we're on museums this week, but I also mean it to other public history, institutions. If you really see what they're doing wrong at times, which is very important because we need to correct those things, these 3 A's kind of cover things. And attention to detail is always important in everything in life. But sometimes we tend to forget this in the nonprofit sector. Because after all, we believe that we're not competing with other museums. In reality, however, we are competing for audience, for people through the turnstiles. We're competing for getting students at our institutions. We're competing for money, for grant money, and we are competing for the money of benefactors and philanthropists, because in the end, we have to keep the doors open. So attention to detail actually begins at the parking lot itself. I have been to many institutions. One particular institution, I talked when I was on the board a lot about the needs of the parking lot. The parking lot had some holes in it. They weren't as bad as the one depicted here on Google, but it had some problems. And, if someone were coming out and was an older person, or they were in heels or whatever, if there's a difference of 4 or 5 inches in part of the parking lot, somebody could take a major tumble. And of course, that not only means that you're feeling morally and ethically responsible for the health of that person, especially say an older person who falls. That can be something that totally changes their quality of life. But it also is a problem for younger people as well. So you want to make certain that everything is secure. Is it secure? Is it safely lit at night? Again, when I was on the board of this museum, I kept, it seemed like I was beating a dead horse, saying, we need to do something about lighting. Not only are there problems with the parking lot, pavement itself, but there was very poor lighting at night, and people in the community were getting back with me and saying, we don't like to go there at night for events. In fact, my own mother tripped in the same parking lot at night, and she said she would never go back to that institution at nights. Well, the worst thing that you can possibly happen to any institution is bad word of mouth. That probably travels more quickly, and in the days of internet access, of Facebook accounts and all kinds of other accounts, you cannot afford to have bad publicity about your institution. Is it attractive? And we're not talking major repairs. Is it something that, do we have weeds growing up all along? Can we get some volunteers to pull some of those weeds? This institution that I worked with said, okay, we're going to get together a bunch of volunteers, And we're going to first approach the city to help us with repaving the parking lot. Then we're going to get some electricians to come in and put in lights. And we're also going to improve the landscaping. We're going to have some nice flowers and bushes put in. A little bit can go an awfully long way. At the front door, what does the institution look like? Is it inviting? And you know, we oftentimes forget that our visitors begin to experience and begin to weigh their experience and begin to judge our institutions from the moment they park their car in our parking lots. And then as they make their way into the institution, what does it look like? Is it inviting? Is it landscaped? What is the condition of the building? Is it handicapped accessible? And you know, there are laws, state and federal, that make this very important to us, but it's also important to us because we want to be accessible institutions to everyone. We have an aging population in the United States. People are living longer than they've ever lived before, and we want to be aware of that. We want to welcome them to our institutions. Is there adequate signage? And this is a bigger problem than sometimes you realize. The next time you go to a museum, put yourself in the position of someone who's never been there. So if you decide to go to a museum in the local area and you've been there a dozen times or more and you know where everything is, try to put yourself in the position of someone who's never been there before. Would you be able to have all the proper directions in terms of signage, in terms of consistency in the signage, in terms of the size of the signage? I mean, some people are visually impaired, and you know, the signs have to be large enough, but not obviously overwhelming, to know where the entrance was. Sometimes museums and historical societies just assume you know where the main entrance is, and we know that there's usually only one main entrance because you have to have security at the other entrances. You have to have other fire and safety access, right, exits and so forth, but you can't have all of those be entrances. So do we know where the entrance is? Do we know where the restrooms are, etc.? And probably one of the most important things, although these are always important, and again, I like this image from Google.com showing the intersection almost of success and failure, really begins at the front desk in ticketing. Do employees welcome visitors? I was absolutely appalled. I was at a nationally recognized museum. I went into the museum. I have a membership there. And I, of course, have a 1+1 membership, so I would get in free, and then one friend would get in free. But I had a family from out of town. And this family grew up in New York City. So they obviously know museums. They know good museums. They need to realize that they are being served as a customer. And they were appalled, and I was appalled, because there were 3 people behind the desk doing nothing other than talking to one another. One was on the phone, one looked like they were on their cell phone, and you know, they were kind of just like, it was almost bothersome for them to sell me the other 4 tickets. And they didn't say, "Oh, welcome, I see that you're a member, I'm glad to see that you're back. How may we help you today? May we give you a map, a guide? Can we tell you, do you know where the restrooms are? Do you know where the gift shop is, etc.?" They made assumptions, perhaps, that I was a member and somehow knew the museum inside and out. But I had guests with me, 4 other guests, and, well, counting the other 5 guests, actually, 6 people coming to a museum, and no one bothered. Again, it seemed like an imposition to them that they had to stop their conversations or to stop their computer or texting or whatever they were doing to sell us tickets. And then it was obvious to me that they were just glad to do the transaction, you know, paid it by MasterCard or Visa, whatever, and to get us on our way so that they could continue to do what they were already doing. And, you know, we were an interruption to their day. Well, you know, I didn't even have to mention that to my 5 guests. They mentioned it to me during the course of their visit. In fact, it put a kind of a pall over, a kind of a cloud immediately for the visit. I think they would have liked the exhibits much more if they had had a smiling face and welcome to our museum and how may we help you, but automatically their first impression right out of the gate, right there in the lobby, was, you're really not welcome here. You're an imposition. Do employees welcome visitors? Do employees smile? You know, when I got my first full-time teaching job back in 1987, fall of 1987 at Thomas More College, and I was a tenure track professor, a little old nun, she had so much wisdom, sat me down and she would mentor me. But one of the first things she said before classes started, and we only had a couple of weeks to get ready for classes. I was replacing someone who had gone to become a dean and they needed someone quickly. And she said to me, she said, Paul, no matter how you feel on any particular day, when you go into that classroom, those students are paying tuition to get their money's worth. Give them their money's worth. Give them their money's worth in terms of what they need, in terms of a lecture so that they can learn and they can be successful in their lives, but do it with a smile on your face. And she said, you may have all kinds of health problems, family problems, spouse problems, whatever in your life, but you owe your class a smile and a good disposition when you go in to teach, because that is a stage, and if you have to be an actor on that stage for an hour lecture, then you do that. And by the way, Paul, if you really need to talk about something and you need some help, come into my office afterwards and, you know, cry on my shoulder, tell me what's happening in your life, and I'll help you. Do we expect employees to smile at our visitors? Yes. You know, you can look at this another way too. Sometimes we may not realize the extent of the problems that our visitors to our institutions have. We can only imagine. I have had visitors who were terminally ill and only had, you know, a certain amount of time to live, and they wanted to spend it traveling, going to museums. And those people aren't going to come into our museums and say, I'm terminally ill. I want to have a good time today. I have problems getting along with my spouse or my children, or, you know, I have a major health issue with a family member, or we all have problems. They come in and they're looking to have a good time at our institutions. They're looking to learn something, but they're also looking to have a good time. So at the front desk, we need to welcome them, we need to respect them, we need to smile at them. Is ticketing effective? I mean, does it go fairly quickly, or, you know, are we using systems that are too slow, old-fashioned? Is there a museum guide? Is it available in other languages? Can we work with a college or university or a foreign language teacher at a high school in the area, if we're in a small area, to get our museum guides translated into another language? Spanish would be an obvious one. French would be another obvious one, because we'll have, you know, perhaps visitors coming in from other parts of North and South America. Japanese. Is there a Japanese company in town that brings in visitors? Is there a Korean-owned company in town? Do we need it in other languages? Are there Chinese businessmen coming in, German businessmen, whatever? It's very important to be accessible in terms of language as well. Do employees make certain that visitors know where the restrooms are, the gift shop, the snack shop? So a typical nice front desk would be, well, welcome to our museum this morning. How may I help you? And, a mother and a father and 2 children, 2.1 children come in, and we say, oh, well, we have a children's rate, and we have a senior citizen, and oh, I see that you brought along maybe some people who might be eligible for our senior discount. You'll always want to make certain that you don't, that you're not, seeming somehow critical of their age or pointing out their age. You want to, be very understanding that people don't often like to give their age. Sometimes they'd rather not take the senior discount, but you want to at least make certain that somehow that there are different maybe price ranges available, that they know that you take their money, that you give them a guide, that you let them know where the restrooms, gift shop. If they have any questions, please feel free to contact you or anybody with a certain color shirt or, a uniform on, whatever. Are the visitors invited to ask other questions? And the last thing you might want to say, and a good teacher will do the same thing at the end of the class, are there any questions, any other questions that you would have? Attention to detail continues with the exhibits. And we have to be very certain about accuracy. So you'll all be taking a 689 class this coming semester. It's going to be called 594 Research and Writing, and it's all required class. And we're going to obviously go over a lot of the techniques there of research and writing, but accuracy of exhibits is very important. There are so many people who are going to be coming to your museum who are experts in a particular area. You cannot be experts in all areas. You cannot be a transportation expert and know about airplanes and know about streetcars and buses and automobiles, and you cannot be an expert in quilts, and you can't be an expert in furniture and in architecture and art. Obviously, we all have different specialties, but you may be required, especially at a smaller museum, to put together an exhibit. And it's at that point in time that you will want to immerse yourself in the study of whatever it is you're looking up, and to not be afraid to ask questions, and to not be afraid to ask people at local colleges and universities and experts and specialists to help you to read over the script and to leave enough time for that to happen. The last thing you want to do is like one institution, again, that I was on the board of, made some mistakes in labeling and descriptions on exhibit panels about steamboats. Well, there are a lot of people in this United States that love steamboats and can tell you everything about a steamboat, and that's all you need to do is get something wrong, and automatically they think that the whole entire exhibit or maybe the whole entire museum is reflective of poor research. Are the exhibits attractive? Nowadays with Adobe Photoshop and with so many other kinds of resources, there's no excuse to have sloppy looking exhibits. So you can still do things on the inexpensive side, but do a wonderful job of it. Are the exhibits effective? And we'll be talking more and more about this and how exhibits, you're going to try to get people with each exhibit or to learn one or two major things. The mind cannot remember everything, but if they can come out of your museum knowing a couple of things that they didn't know before and being enthusiastic about those things, then that's wonderful. Accessibility. I've been involved and have gone to museums where the labels, they had wonderful artifacts, but the labels were so tiny and the print on them were so tiny that you couldn't even enjoy the artifacts. And of course, I'm somewhat visually impaired, so that's a problem, but it wasn't only me. I went with a few people, one of whom has excellent vision. I mean, he's probably a 2015 at times, which is, you know, way better than 2020, and he was complaining that the labels were too small. So you've got to think, again, you've got to put yourself into the position of your visitors. And you've got to ask all those questions. Are they young? Are they old? Is the language appropriate? Have I done my research? Is the signage proper? Is the size of the print proper? Etc. Not, again, according to your vision, not according to your hearing ability, not according to what you know about the topic, but putting yourself in the position relating to your visitors. Are they monotonous or engaging? Again, really, in the kinds of exhibits that we do in the 21st century, there's no reason why they have to be monotonous. They should be engaging and embrace technology if we can. And how do they flow? Obviously, the flow of an exhibit, and we'll talk more about this, is very, very important. Attention to detail continues throughout the visit to their museum, to your institution. And again, there are questions that you need to ask about accessibility. I was on this same museum board, and there was a small step that you had to take up to one of the particular exhibits that you walked through. Well, an older lady fell on that step. She ended up, you know, suing the institution. Somebody else fell on that step. I mean, it might be as simple as saying, let's put a ramp there. You know, if the exhibit has to be up, then let's put a ramp there, and one that meets handicapped accessibility models. Signage, again, are they able to know where the next gallery is or where they should go in the next gallery? I've been to major museums where it isn't really clear where you go next. And it's not that, you know, there's not a chronological way of doing it. Yes, they do have a chronology. I can think of one major museum in one of the largest cities in the United States where, you know, it just wasn't clear to us where the chronology was going and whether you were going to go across the hall, down the hall, or what. Restrooms. I have done so many things with the public, and for 10 years I was Director of International Studies at Thomas More College, and we used to bring groups of students and adults in from countries like Taiwan and Japan and Germany, all throughout the world, and we would have them for several weeks at the college, and we would take them on trips all throughout Kentucky and Ohio, and we would always take them up to usually Washington, D.C., and sometimes Philadelphia, New York City, big bus tours, etc. Well, I can tell you that one of the number one questions people will have on their mind when they're far from home or when they're not in circumstances and places familiar to them is, where are the restrooms? And when is the next restroom stop going to be? You know, so if you're going on a 2-hour tour, someplace on a bus, or a 3-hour tour, you need to make certain that you have stops. You know, maybe you stop an hour and a half into it if the bus doesn't have a restroom. You always have to make certain that you take care of the needs of all of your visitors. And the restrooms need to be clean, not like this Google image. We all know that we will rate a restaurant, a museum, or anything on any number of factors, and one of them is the cleanliness of the restroom. A rather recent survey of restaurant patrons gave the cleanliness of the restroom and the facilities and the dinnerware itself as more important even than the service that they received from the servers, from the waiters themselves. Places to sit. Some people have problems standing for long periods of time. It's not necessarily just older people. Some people have, you know, broken legs, broken knees, whatever in the past. They have arthritis, any number of problems, and they might be with a larger group, and they may need to go and sit for some place for a few minutes. Snacks. Some people are diabetic. Some people are going to need some place to go for a snack because maybe their sugar is running low. There are all kinds of things. So that's very important also to consider for visitors. And gift shops are not only a great revenue stream to help keep the doors open, but gift shops are also a way for people to buy family and friends gifts, and they like things that are made in that local area. They like things that they can bring home and that tell the story of the places that they've been. Now, rule number 3 is adaptability. So, once you go through your museum or your institution and you're working with other people, but we're assuming maybe by this time you're associate director or director or whatever, are you adaptable to making changes regarding audience and attention to detail as needed? Your audience needs are going to change. You're going to find things that are wrong in your exhibits. Are you adaptable to making the necessary changes and to regard those criticisms from your peers as hopefully positive criticisms, to, in other words, give and receive positive criticisms. Obviously, no one likes people who are just totally negative. So if you can couch the need to make changes in such a manner that you're being very diplomatic, but you're also saying to that person, you know, I can assist you. I know I have some friends who know a lot about steamboats, and we're doing this steamboat exhibit, and I know that this is your major exhibit to put together, but I do have some friends, and I'd be happy to introduce you to those friends. You know, obviously reaching out and helping others without trying to interfere with their work, without trying to make them feel somehow helpless or being overly critical of them, but learning how to give positive criticism, and even more importantly, how to receive positive criticism. Adaptability to technology. And some of you are probably just in love with the technology. Some of you are perhaps just hate the technology. One of the reasons why we have all of you taking 601 as an online class, and we discuss this, and we have different views of it in public history, is that everybody probably needs in the 21st century today to have had at least one online class. Because when you go out there in your institution, you may be giving those kinds of professional development classes, those continuing education units, those CEUs, for other museum associates, for other archivists, for teachers, and a lot of this is going more and more online. My 80-some-year-old father, who still practices part-time as a CPA, Certified Public Accountant, gets online and takes his continuing education credits, his continuing education units online, almost all of them online, and he enjoys it, and there's feedback, and there's interactivity as well. So all of us need to keep up with that technology for the sake of our audience, for the sake of our visitors. So that's very important. It was appalling to me that I went to a museum of broadcasting, which actually was a wonderful museum in Chicago, and I went there just in the past few weeks, and I found that they were using mainly just exhibit panels. So the first floor was radio, and they had a bunch of exhibit panels which you had to read. And then they had all these radios around, and they didn't label really the radios. And I thought, and my friend who went with me is also in museums, said in libraries, well, look at this. They could have taken some of these radios, put in speakers behind them or incorporated them into the radio, and could have, you could have pressed a button, and instead of reading all this text, you could have heard it through the radio itself. And the radio could have introduced itself. And I'm a Crosley radio from 1942. I was manufactured, la la la. Wouldn't that have been much more interesting? Then we went upstairs to the television section. Well, now you had a wonderful opportunity, which they completely missed, of having flat screen TVs, or even better, taking the consoles of old televisions, which sometimes were quite pretty, you know. I mean, you put these things in your living room and they were wood. And even if you couldn't get the old television consoles themselves, just making some that looked retro, right? Everybody loves retro. And you could have done, instead of all these flat exhibits, you know, made out of cardstock, you could have done something very interactive. And instead, we went and left the museum and said, this is a museum of radio and technology, which was the cutting edge technologies of their time. And we came out of it thinking that they weren't using the cutting edge technologies of our time to tell the story of the cutting edge technologies of radio and television. And we need to adapt ourselves to edutainment. I think you've already encountered this with our first week of readings, and you will encounter it with our other readings, which are in the LaPaglia book. You know, there seems to be this gulf between sometimes academic historians and public historians. And sometimes academic historians, you know, condescendingly look down upon public historians. And vice versa, since I kind of straddle both sides. I work with public historians, teach public historians, but I have, you know, this academic record of academic publications and teaching, etc. So sometimes, you know, sometimes I don't fit in necessarily on either side, which is strange. So I'll be working for a museum and a public institution, and I'll occasionally get those museum associates saying to me, well, you know, you have the PhD and you're looking at this in a totally different way than we look at this, which, by the way, to be fair, may or may not be true, because sometimes they just see me as having a PhD, right? And that's the first impression and will always be the first impression. Or somebody else might look at them and say, well, you have a master's and you don't have a PhD. We need to get beyond that and say, how does our audience, how do they react to what we're looking at? And again, we're not teaching students who are paying big tuition dollars. We don't have to keep accreditation agencies like the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, you know, convinced of what we're doing in the classroom. Most people who are visiting museums, historical houses, and the like, national parks, are doing it on vacation or on their off time, and they want to learn something, as Tilden will keep telling us. They want to learn something, but they want to also be entertained. So education plus entertainment has given us this fairly new term of edutainment. Some people say that museums are doing too much entertainment, that they're embracing too much the technology of the 21st century, that they're dumbing things down. I would argue that museums have always used the newest ways of bringing the education to a wide range of people in terms of ages and background. So we are involved, whether we like to use the term or not. We are involved in the edutainment business, and we have to constantly be aware of that. One of the places that does that very well is Disney. And back in the 1990s, they were even having commercials based upon the Beauty and the Beast theme, Be Our Guest. So I invite you to be my guest and to go ahead and look at this 31-second commercial from Disney and listen very much to the lyrics and to what they're saying. So we've given you 3 A's so far. The first one being audience, audience, audience. The second one being attention to detail. And the third one being adaptability. Now you're going to be reading a lot of stuff for this class, and I can see I have a single. See, this is not attention to detail. I should have had double quotes here. you're going to be reading a lot of stuff for this class, and we're going to be doing discussion boards, and we want to get together very soon here so we can meet one another in person. And so I'm going to let us as a class come up with the fourth A. Now we can do that as a class, and we can come up with probably another 10 different A's and choose the one we want to use, or you can choose one for yourself in your final reflective essays. So if there's any questions, please feel free to contact me. If not, we will certainly catch up with you in the next couple of weeks as I send an email trying to set up a place and a time that we can all meet, and hope that you have an excellent second week.